Hi, and welcome to Fostering Conversations, produced by CASA of Southwest Missouri. This is a podcast where we share the real stories of real children navigating the foster care system. Hi, my name is Shelby Blakely, and I'm our training coordinator. Today we have the privilege to speak to Dr. Micheala Steinmetz-Benton. Hey, girl.
Hey.
She has her master's degree in cellular and molecular biology and a doctorate in educational leadership. She's an educator of bioclinical sciences at Ozark Technical College and Southwest Baptist University. Micheala was an honoree in the 40 Under 40 by the Springfield Business Journal. She's also a board member for the Junior League of Springfield. Micheala's been with CASA for a long time. She was a volunteer for 7 years now almost, and she'll also be serving as a CASA ambassador, and she serves on our board of directors. She further serves at CASA on our program committee as well. So thank you so much for taking the time to come and speak with us today.
Of course.
We're so excited to learn from you and just see what your perspective, your experiences have led to and how we can match that up against what the foster care system looks like these days.
Yeah.
Well, we'll just jump into it, but if you have anything you want to share at the end, you'll have some time to do that too.
Oh, okay, perfect.
Okay, well, in your 40 Under 40 profile in the Springfield Business Journal, you stated that you went through many adverse experiences and had every reason to go astray. Yet every time you faltered, someone came along and intervened. Can you tell us more about what those experiences are and how you were able to overcome them with that support?
Sure can. Yeah. So I've shared before, I was the keynote speaker for Casablanca 2025, and I shared my story there. But I have a lot of adverse experiences growing up, and that's something I try to talk about openly because it's a reality for so many kids. And I entered foster care after experiencing abuse and neglect. And like many children in the system, I moved between homes and just kind of often felt invisible.
Mm.
Of course, I had a caseworker that would come and visit, but just like many caseworkers today, they are overworked and, in my honest opinion, underpaid. And so she was only able to give so much time.
Mm-hmm.
And so there just wasn't really a consistent adult in my life advocating for me in the way that I needed. When I left the foster care system, I ended up being reunified with one of my biological parents. But unfortunately, the abuse and neglect would return. And it really escalated when I was a teenager, about 16 years old. It really reached a peak. And so I made the difficult decision to leave for my own safety. And so I stayed with friends for a while. I stayed with an aunt for a little bit, just to have some level of stability and safety. Eventually, I did try to go back home again when I was 19, and it just continued to not be the safest place for me to be.
Mm-hmm.
And so by then, I decided to just go and live in my car. And I had this car that I'd gotten for a few $100s off of Craigslist. And so I was just living out of my car for a while when I was 19. So I was homeless and I was working multiple jobs to make ends meet. I was private tutoring, I was tutoring at Ozarks Tech, and I was working as a barista. And eventually, I was able to get enough money to get my first apartment, which was not in the safest neighborhood. But what I mean by intervention is that I feel like my life could have gone a very different direction because, in and amongst all of that, there was always somebody who was standing up for me, whether it was a teacher who was like, I see you, I can see that you're going through a hard time, or it was a colleague or a friend. There were multiple people in my story who intervened and said, I will not let you fall.
Mm.
And I remember a couple of experiences from high school. There was one time when I was in my trigonometry class. I've always been really good at math. I love math. I took 7 math classes in high school. And so I was in trig as a sophomore, I believe. I took college algebra and trig by my sophomore year. And I was not doing well in his class. I remember I was getting a D, and it was very traumatizing for me to be in that class because my textbook was actually used as a weapon on me.
Mm.
And so anytime I would open that textbook, I would think about it. And so it was very hard for me to focus. And so
For sure.
I was struggling in that class. And my teacher, he knew and he could sense it. And I remember getting my report card at the end of the year and he'd given me an A in trig. And I had no idea why because I did not earn it. But I think that he knew I was a bright student having a hard time. And I will just never forget it because, up until that point, I was working so hard to be on the honor roll. I was so sure that based on the experiences I was having with my teachers and how they were so kind and loving and supportive, that if I just kept working really hard in school, it would make a difference. And so getting that grace so that my academic record wouldn't be tarnished was so kind and so generous, and he had no idea, he didn't know anything in my
Sure.
story, he could just tell, I would come to classes sometimes with obvious signs of that something was going on, and, there was another time where my French teacher in high school pulled me out of class and just held me while I cried, um, and I worked out at Ozarks Tech at Ridgewood Valley, and in the basement, they have or on the lower level, they have a locker room with showers and things like that. And I remember my boss, Joe Millsap, I love that man. He asked me once if everything was all right. I think that some coworkers had seen me like sleeping in my car in the parking lot, and then I would go downstairs before my shift to get kind of cleaned up.
Mhm.
And he asked, what's going on? What's happening? And I kind of explained what my situation was. And he made a report, I believe, to admin at Ozarks Tech, and they were able to get me a gas card so that I could save some of the money that I was raising to get my first apartment. And instead of putting that towards gas, put it towards. And so that really helped me get my first down payment. Another colleague had heard a little bit about what was going on and slipped a $100 bill in my cubby at work. And just little things like that that made a difference. People saw that I needed help and they intervened.
Yeah.
And I think that it's something that is so important because oftentimes I don't think people see something and say something as often as they should. And that's what's so special about CASA is you get that opportunity to do just that. But when I mean that my experience led me to have many possibilities to go astray, I mean literally statistically. So I don't know if you've heard about the adverse childhood experiences study. I'm sure you have in your line of work, but my A score is a 10. And so statistically, there's no reason that I should have the life that I have today. But because of that intervention, people seeing me, believing in me, and helping, that's the big one, is actually helping.
Yeah.
I was able to pull through.
Yeah.
And so I think that that really comes down to it is the big difference for me was helpers and decisions. People stepping in at those critical moments and me being very intentional about my decisions, knowing the pattern, recognizing the pattern, becoming educated and choosing education, choosing stability, and trying to be very mindful about the relationships that I had in my life. I had to make hard decisions for my mental health, including eventually stepping away from relationships that were not healthy and not serving me. So as of now, I'm no contact with my family of origin. Uh, and I decided to focus on me. So all of those little decisions added up. I ended up pursuing higher education with encouragement from those teachers. I earned 4 degrees in that time, including my doctorate, and now I have a home, a stable life, a happy marriage, a wonderful husband, and I have a sweet little boy who I just dropped off at preschool this morning. And yeah, I think that that intervention, the support, and the opportunities changed everything for me.
Yeah. Absolutely. Well, thank you so much for sharing. I know that can feel really heavy. Um, but it's so true. We have to know what these children might be experiencing before we know how we can help them a little bit. But we have to keep our eyes open. We have to be intentional about helping and being there for them. Thank you so much for sharing that. And I'm so proud of you too.
Oh, thank
You really are thriving, Dr. Michaela. Just a little bit more into how did you discover and become involved with CASA since you are so involved with us now?
So it's funny, actually. I am pretty involved in the community. I decided at one point that it was really important to, once I got stable in my life, I just felt this calling to pay it forward. I remember one of our Christmases, I think we were an adoptive family because there was one morning where people just came in and like brought a bunch of presents and food. And it was so moving for me as a younger person. And I was like, oh, all these people were here and they were helpers and they just helped. And it's their holiday too, but they're still here for us right now. And I remember thinking, when I'm bigger, I want to be one of those people. I want to be a helper too. And so once I got more stable in my life and kind of worked through, so I have a PTSD diagnosis. And when I worked through some of that and was feeling really secure, I thought, I think I'm ready to pay it forward now.
Yeah.
And so I got involved with the Junior League of Springfield. That was my starting point. And it's an organization of women where we are focusing on leadership training, but we also do community impact. And that kind of plugged me in all over Springfield. I love the Junior League. I love it so much. But that kind of plugged me in all over Springfield. So I was on a committee my first year in a Junior League, and on that committee, we would focus on a partnership with Isabel's House. And so Isabel's House is a crisis nursery in the Ozarks, and it helps families in crisis and it makes it easier for people who maybe are going through a housing situation, domestic disputes, things like that. We've also had people who maybe like if the mom has cancer, but she doesn't have any support in the area. This is a place for children to go and be safe and stable while mom and dad figure it out without having to go into the system.
Yeah.
And that I thought was a really amazing mission. And so I started volunteering at Isabel's house. I was working with Junior League. And then I was speaking at a Junior League event where we had partnered with Ozarks Tech and the middle college program.
Mm-hmm.
And there are some young people in there who are also experiencing adversity. And so they came to the Junior League, and we have a place called the Plaid Door. So they got to pick out some clothing to upgrade their attire for professional needs. And then we also served them lunch. And then during their lunch, I kind of shared my story and overcoming adversity and pursuing higher education. And at the middle college, it was just speaking with those young ladies was so amazing. I had several come up and say, my story was like yours, and yours gives me hope.
Mm-hmm.
And that really kind of lit my fire. Like
Yeah.
for a while, I had been keeping my story under wraps, almost because it's a very vulnerable thing. And sometimes it can bring up those traumatic experiences. So that's hard. It takes some energy to do it. But also, you never know how people will respond. So I kept it under wraps for a long time because sometimes when I would be vulnerable and say, oh, I'm no contact with some of my family, people would say, but they're your family. You have to. And it's painful to hear that because it puts the shame on the person who experienced the trauma. And also because if it told you some of the things that were done to me by a family member, but I said that it was a boyfriend who had done it, you would say, well, break up with him.
Right.
So do we treat it differently if it's a very vulnerable thing to share your story. But I was so moved and so inspired and in a much better place that I was like, I want to do this again. It kind of lit a fire under me. And I was like, I want to do this again because it helps somebody, you know?
Yeah.
And also, I think when you share your story, you teach other people how they can better help.
Yes.
And so, anyway, I got done with that and was speaking with the young ladies. And Sarah, who is also a CASA volunteer, came up to me, and she's in Junior League, but she was serving for CASA and said, have you thought about volunteering for CASA? And I said, what is CASA? What does that stand for? And so she explained it to me and was like, I just think that having foster care experience is something that would make you an excellent CASA volunteer. I just really encourage you to check it out. And she was like, do you know Laura Farmer, another Junior League member, is actually the executive director of CASA. You should talk to her. And so I was like, okay. So I met with Laura And we went to breakfast at First Watch. It was delicious. And we were just sitting there and she was like, let me tell you about Casa Baby. And I was like, I'm in. Tell me everything. And she just got me so excited and motivated. And I went home and applied that day. And then in the summer of 2019, I went through the CASA training, and that was incredible. Rebecca Weber was the person who trained me,
Yeah.
and she was pregnant right at the time. And so she's up there and just this cute little pregnant belly telling us all about CASA. I just remember it was such a wonderful experience. And I just felt even more motivated and excited to join. And so that's really where my story began. And I picked up my first case in August of 2019 after I was sworn in.
Yeah. Crazy.
Yeah.
And now look at you. You're on the board. We're an ambassador.
Now you can't get rid of me.
Spoke at Casa Blanca as our keynote speaker. So we're so grateful for you and your involvement. So
I'm
thank goodness for Sarah. By the way, have you heard of Casa?
She was like, hey, Queen, I got something to tell you. And I was like, yep, me up. Tell me all about it, Queen.
Seriously, obviously a great match. It's worked out for a while. Yeah, perfect. Okay, well, we're going to get a little bit scientific if that's okay. Let's do it. So, with your background in biology, can you help us understand how trauma or even chronic stress can affect a child's brain and body development?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay, thank you.
I think we're all gonna have to put on our science hat, but so as you mentioned, teach bioclinical sciences. So I teach human anatomy and physiology in higher education, and so this is something that we talk about a lot: is development through the lifespan, how the body changes and reacts to different things. And one thing that I think people don't realize is how much early experiences to adversity can alter a child's developing body and brain.
Mhm.
So, one of the things that I try to help people understand is that trauma isn't just emotional, it's biological. We now have really strong research, including that study that I mentioned before, the Adverse Childhood Experiences study, that shows a direct relationship between early trauma and long term health outcomes. So, we know that the higher someone's ACE score, the higher their risk is for things like heart disease, depression, substance use issues, and even a shorter life expectancy. And so, what's happening is really how early exposures to heavy doses of adversity can alter what is called the HPA axis, which is the hypothalamic pituitary adrenal axis. So, it's the way that the brain connects to the adrenal glands. And those adrenal glands are responsible for secreting stress hormones. And so, whenever chronic stress is something that a child is exposed to early and often, it puts them in a constant state of fight or flight, basically. So, that means that stress hormones like cortisol stay elevated for long periods of time. And this affects lots of things in the body. So, we know that elevated cortisol is also connected to elevated blood glucose levels. And so that puts people more at risk for things like diabetes. And of course, this affects brain development in early childhood because the amygdala, we start to see measurable differences in people who've had a lot of exposure to adversity versus those who haven't in the amygdala, which is a part of the brain. This is responsible for fear and threat detection, and it becomes overactive. We also know that early childhood trauma affects a region of the brain called the prefrontal cortex, right up here in the frontal lobe, and that helps with decision making and impulse control. And people who've had high doses of adversity throughout adolescence, we see that that part of the brain becomes underdeveloped. And so we also know that memory and the ability to learn can become impacted by trauma as well. When we see these behaviors in children who've experienced trauma, things like difficulty focusing, emotional outbursts, withdrawal, those aren't just behavioral issues. They are the symptoms of trauma. They are often biological responses to prolonged stress. And we also hear too, well, of course they're going to have poor outcomes because people, you have a rocky childhood, you start doing drugs. And that's not that simple. It's a chicken and egg situation. They are more prone to struggle with substance abuse because of the early changes to their endocrine system, their nervous system that come from trauma.
Mm.
And we know that it's a dose dependent response, meaning that the more adversity they experience, the higher that ACE score, the more likely it is that they're to struggle with these things. So That's actually where the biology comes in. We create things like addiction when we traumatize children and we don't intervene. The hopeful part is that intervention works when we educate parents, when we intervene with children, when we give them healthy coping strategies,
Yeah.
when we are a present, consistent, supportive adult in that child's life. It can buffer those stress responses. Even you and I, right now, being in close proximity with somebody for more than 30 seconds at a time, we start releasing oxytocin. Our brain wants us to bond and connect. We are biologically wired to be social creatures and to love. And even just being this close with a kid, listening, being present, being supportive, showing up for them, you are activating that. And that is going to minimize the effects of the cortisol on their body and that long term stress. Intervention matters, and being physically present for a child matters. And that's why CASA volunteers are so incredibly important, because you're not just showing up, you are actively helping change that child's developmental trajectory.
Yeah.
And of course, I have had someone tell me before, was like, aren't there like always 20 people working on a kid's case when they're in foster care? And that may be true. They have a DJO, they have the caseworker, they have the guardian ad litem, which is the children's attorney. There's the parents' attorneys, there's parent guides and parent educators. There are all of these people. But the one person whose job is primarily to focus on that kid is the CASA,
Yeah.
if they have a CASA. Now, with a caseworker, you might say, well, that's their job. But again, this is one person who may have 30 cases.
Yeah.
And so they only have so much time with that child. Where with you, you have that one case. You are with that child.
Mm-hmm.
And that is your focus. You're getting to know them. You're advocating for them in court. You are making sure they get the interventions that they need to help prevent developmental issues that are caused by trauma.
Mm.
And so the work that we do is so incredibly important. And not only are you helping them, but it's so fulfilling for you too. I want to tell everybody about Costa, because it's like, do you ever have like a really good piece of cake?
Yes.
And you're like, and then you think of someone in your life, you're like, oh, I wish I could share this with them because it feels so good. And it's, oh, like, that's how I feel. I'm like, I want everyone to have a piece of this cake.
Yeah.
It's so special. It's so special for the kid. It's so special for you. It can be very, for me, I have found it to be very cathartic to
Yeah.
be a helper.
Absolutely. One, it also probably brings back memories of those who have helped you
Yes.
and how grateful you are to be where you are because of them. So I'm sure it's this beautiful cycle of just gratitude, maybe.
Yes.
But also how transformative I've seen this experience be for our volunteers who, especially those who have never had any interaction with the foster care system themselves until they're adults. They're learning so much, they're overwhelmed for sure.
Yeah.
But at the end, they are so relieved that they did it just because they know that the impact that they made on that kid's told them how special that was for them, or what they were able to do to make sure that their voice was heard. So thank you for making sure that those kiddos' voices are heard too, and helping give us some context to what this really means,
Mhm.
what that abuse and neglect can look like for a kiddo's brain and body is scary, but that resilience and building that bounce back is so special and powerful. I think it's an honor and a privilege almost to be able to be that for these kids. So we'll keep on going, but gosh, we love Casa and what we're doing here.
Yeah.
Okay, so how have your experiences and knowledge with child welfare from your life growing up and everything, how has that affected how you educate others?
So that's actually one of the reasons why I became an educator. Is I, for a long time, wanted to understand why the things happened to me that did. And, there's psychology, and there's all these, there's the soft sciences. And I was thinking, I want to understand biologically what's happening. What is happening on a biological level? And in fact, in my master's program, I studied sirtuins, where we talked about how they affect epigenetic changes over the lifespan. So, how our body and DNA, how DNA is read and transcribed, can be altered by life experiences. Certain things can be turned on and turned off, and that, of course, can change us physiologically. And so, that wanting to understand my own life experiences and the things that happened to me and the reasons why, my biological parents might have done what they've done was the motivator for me to become an educator. And now that I know, I want to shout it from the rooftops. It's the cycle of abuse is biological. It has a biological component. And so I think understanding that, particularly as an educator, being trauma informed matters. And so it's something that I want to be aware of when I'm in my classroom, when I'm teaching, when students are saying, hey, I need more time on this assignment. That's something, it affects how the way that I treat students, but it also affects the way that I talk about it with students too. Because a lot of the students who are taking my classes, which is, of course, bioclinical sciences, A and P, they are going into health fields. And so I think it's really important to understand the impacts, the long term impacts of trauma whenever you're working in a clinical setting.
Yeah.
Because again, I said it's a dose dependent response. The more adversity you experience, the more likely you're going to have health issues. And so this is one of those interventions that can be taking place where a doctor being aware of this can help with prevention. What are things that we can be doing to prevent those health outcomes for somebody who's had a rocky start? And so outside of the classroom and in my volunteer experience, whenever I'm engaging with people in the community, I think it's really important to talk about trauma and to talk about it in a way that lets people feel empowered. Because sometimes I think that we say, this is what foster care looks like. It can be really traumatic. These are, and we're focusing on the problem and the difficulties and the challenges, which are important. But I think that it's important to give hope and let people know, but you can intervene. So I think educating people on this is what happens when intervention doesn't happen. And then also giving them a window to get involved and to intervene, I think it's very important. But a lot of people, I remember talking about community green flags and red flags. So the things that are happening, particularly in the Springfield, Missouri area, that are of public concern, and then the things that we're doing well. And oftentimes, one of the red flags is child abuse and neglect, substance abuse, concerns about education outcomes. And as I've just mentioned, trauma has a hand in every single one of those things. It affects our ability to learn, leading to education issues. It affects our ability to cope. It affects the prefrontal cortex and the amygdala. So then people who are abused often become abusers because of how their development was disrupted. And so they're paying it forward. And then it can also lead to poverty because if we're having trouble with impulse control and substance abuse, then sometimes that can affect how we are managing funds and our ability to keep a job. And so all of these things are connected. And I guarantee that if we focused on intervention for children experiencing adversity, all of those outcomes could become green flags. I truly believe that it starts here. If we were pouring this love and intervention into our children, we would build more resilient communities.
Hey, well, I love that. That is so important. Thank you so much for taking what you've experienced and adding it on to that workload that you have now. And I think preparing our future nurses and doctors in that way with that intention is critical. And oh my gosh, yeah, if we could take all of those other things away just by taking care of our children better in our community, I hope that that's the truth. And I hope that we're able to do that one day. Like,
Yeah.
I don't know, it would be incredible with the prevention work that's happening. I hope so. I'm optimistic.
Yeah.
Maybe not 100%. Let's be realistic a little bit too, but let's wipe it out. So you've been so deeply involved in so many organizations in our community over the years. Can you walk us through some of the work you've done and what motivates you to continue to do that in our community?
Yeah, of course. I think that I've always believed strong communities and resilient communities happen when people choose to show up for each other. So, over the years, as you mentioned, I was involved in the Junior League of Springfield, CASA. I've been involved with Isabel's House. I've sat on the board for all three of those organizations. And in those organizations, I've also had the opportunity to connect with other organizations as well. So with Junior League, we often partner with other organizations. So we worked with the Drew Lewis Foundation. We've worked with Care to Learn. We've worked with the Kitchen. Lots of area organizations that are really there to help support children, women and children. And that for me is just a very important part of being a community member. I feel like it is our responsibility to show up for one another. And for me, the thing that keeps me motivated is that I remember the people who invested time, kindness, and encouragement in me, and I want to pay that forward. I carry all of them with me. And I think that whenever we support one another and intervene in a child's story or intervene in anyone's story, we are creating a ripple effect. It's like a drop in the water and it expands out because you helped this one person, they're now helping others. I actually want to talk a little bit about one of my cases that I had. So, the case, my very first CASA case that I was on, I wrapped up in 2020. I was working with 3 children at the time, and I will keep their names anonymous, of course. But one of the kids in that story reached out to me 5 years later. And in 2025, she said, "Hey, I remember you. I remember you intervening in my story, and you were so important to us at that time. And I just want you to know that I am now wanting to go into casework. I want to be a caseworker and I want to work with children. I want to work in the child welfare industry. And I actually just am about to graduate. And I have a few tickets for my college graduation, and I saved one for you. I would just love it if you would come." And so I went to her graduation and I got to walk down, and it was so incredible to be at the beginning of that story when they entered the system, and then to see 5 years later that ripple effect.
Yeah.
I was the drop in the water for her,
Yes.
and because of her experience, she was like, "I wanna be a helper too." And so that's what I mean with resilient communities is because I intervened in this child's stories and there were many people on her team who intervened. She is now paying it forward and now she's going to be a helper. And now she's going to contribute to a more resilient community. Intervention matters because of the impact it can have over time. We're not always going to see the results right away. And some of these kids are going to struggle a little bit when they leave the system. They might have a hard time because it is so hard to bounce back from those experiences and that biology. But when they do, we something magical happens
Yeah.
and we can really make a difference. So by pouring love into these children, we are setting them up to continue pouring love into themselves and into others. And so I think that is my biggest motivator. That was the first time. Sometimes as a teacher and a volunteer, you don't see the impact after.
Yep.
You're like, I showed up today, I helped, I did my best. And then that's it. That's where the story ends.
Right.
And you don't know what how everyone's doing after. You don't know what happened at the end of the story. And then every now and then something will come back full circle and you'll have a moment where you're like, I'm so glad that I was in a situation where I was able to plant that seed because look how she blossomed,
Yeah.
you know? So it was incredible, and I felt so honored to go
Yeah.
and watch her in this big milestone.
Yeah.
She came from such a difficult experience, and to know that just pouring love in her during this window helped
Yeah.
just to be a small stepping stone in that
Yeah.
child's journey is an incredible feeling.
Yes. Well, yeah, no wonder you keep coming back.
Yeah.
How fun. Thank you for being that person for that child.
You're gonna make me cry.
No, serious.
If you don't want me to ugly cry on this podcast right now, you better stop it.
Okay, well, I don't want you to ugly cry, so I guess I'll go to the next question. Okay, so for someone who's interested in becoming engaged in their community, how would you recommend they get started?
I would say start local.
Okay.
That's really where you're going to see the biggest impact. That's my biggest advice is start small, start local. Just find somewhere to plug in and see if it is something that you think will be mutually beneficial, that is going to make you feel good, fit in with your time availability so that you can be consistent
Yeah.
and show up. Show up. Sometimes people can feel a little overwhelmed by these big social issues. But real change, I think, starts when one person decides to show up for someone else. And I think that organizations like CASA make it very accessible by providing training, support, and guidance throughout the entire process. You don't need a specific background to be a helper, and you just need to care and be willing to be present. And I always tell people this, if you are thinking about volunteering with CASA, do it. Just do it. The children you advocate for will absolutely change your life as much as you hopefully change theirs for the better.
Oh, thank you so much. Okay. Thanks for sharing your experiences, your heart, your expertise and knowledge as well. We're gonna share some of those resources in the comments, maybe the ACEs study, maybe Isabel's house, some other things like that. We'll share our website as well. But thank you,
Yeah,
seriously.
of course. Thank you so
Okay.
much.
This is the part of the episode where we listen to a joke from a child. It's a tradition from our judge here in Greene County who loves when children come into the courtroom and always ask for a joke from them. Specifically, like the punnier the better, the dad jokier the better. So we are going to listen to a little joke and then I don't know. We'll see what it sounds like. We'll probably laugh too. Come on, it'll be funny.
Why do calculators make great friends? You can always count on them.
Yup. That'll do it. Judge will probably give a point for that one for sure.
That's adorable.
Well, thank you so much again for coming and joining us and fostering conversations today. Thanks everybody for tuning in and learning with us. We are another episode down and another child's future up. Bye.